Hello explorers and welcome to another video. Today we are going to talk about Kubernetes in Windows, Windows subsystem for Linux and Docker. So let's jump right into it. And here we have a blog on the Kubernetes homepage that I have followed in order to install these things. And first off, we have why. You can read that if you like. The prerequisites that we need are an OS Windows 10 or later. In this case, 2004 is the required build version. I have that installed already. If you don't, then you need to install that or upgrade your system in order to get this to run. And then we install the subsystem for Linux. And I'm going to go through the different commands you need to run here. You need to run this little command here that will enable the Windows subsystem for Linux if you haven't done that already. And then you have the requirements to update this. And it's updated in your Windows release already, so hopefully you will not be required to do that. Then you need to install the virtual machine feature for Windows. And hopefully you're not required to do that either. But that is something that you can run to check that you have that enabled. If we switch over to my administrator PowerShell here, you see that I've run both of these and they are enabled successfully. And then you download this Windows Linux kernel update. You download that and install that on your machine, and then you turn over to the version 2. And if you do that and you don't have either Hyper-V enabled in your system, or if you haven't enabled the hypervisor virtualization in your BIOS, you will get an error there. And I can't show you how to enable it in your BIOS because it's different for every vendor, but usually you go into your BIOS by pressing Control or Delete or F1 when you start your computer, and then you have a lot of different menus, and somewhere in there you can find virtualization, and you need to turn that on as a feature. And then you need to go into the Windows settings, and here we can search for Windows features, and features turn on and off. And if we look at this Windows here, you have Hyper-V down here. It's a little bit hard to read in the recording, but you will see Hyper-V, and you turn that on in your system. So when you have done that, you will be able to run this VSL without any problems. If you turn the Hyper-V on, it will require a restart, and that's just what it is. And then you install your Linux distro of choice from the Microsoft Store. I don't have the Microsoft Store, so how do you do that? Well, I searched for Windows 10, VSL, distro without store, and you will actually find this manually download Windows subsystem for Linux distro packages, and here you can download one of these, and you need to have the Ubuntu 1804 to continue with this tutorial. And then when you have downloaded that, you will find it on your computer and run in your PowerShell app, add AppX package and the package of that distro. That will give you an option in your start menu to run Ubuntu. So that is pretty much the setup for Windows subsystem for Linux. And then you need to install the Docker desktop for Windows. You have a link here how to download it and install it. I will have this blog post link in the description down below if you want to follow along. And then we start the Ubuntu version. And it will, the first time, ask you to create a user and a password. I've done that already. And optionally, you can go into your sudo file by running sudo sudo, and that will enable you to change this file. And you will look for the group sudo and add no password to that. And that's if you don't want to type in your password every time you do a sudo command. So you will remove some of the safety of your system, but you will have a little bit more flexibility. Then you do a sudo upgrade, update and upgrade, and that's just to have the latest packages in your Linux environment. That will take some time, so I will not run that either. Here we have my current running version here. See if it gets up there. So this is my Linux system, upgraded and ready. And when we have done that, we need to look at the Docker version. And you see here that I have a correctly installed Docker version, but they say that you should have this error, Docker not found. And I had that before, and the same with kube control. And in order to fix that, you run the Docker Windows, let's see what it's actually called, the Docker desktop. So we run the Docker desktop, we go into settings, and here in settings, we need to see that we have this use VSL2 based engine turned on. And we also, under resources and VSL integration, need to enable integration for default VSL distros and then enable Ubuntu here. And when you have checked that and applied restart down here, and it will not restart your system, it's just restarting this Docker daemon here. If you go back to this, you will see that you have the correct version for the Docker environment, and kube CTL version should also show you something. It will tell you that it's down and not running, but it will give you a version. And that's because we haven't installed our cluster yet. So next up, we look at the cluster. So here we have what they signed here. And the first way to install a Kubernetes cluster is kind. It's a very simple way to install things. So you run a curl command to download kind to your computer. You will make that binary executable. Let's see here, I can turn it up a bit so we can see it. We'll make that executable, that kind, and then we will copy that over to USR local bin. And this is a user directory, the local binaries. So it's where you can put your own binaries when you install them in your Linux system. So we put it in there, and that should be available for you later on. If we run echo kube config here, it will tell us that we don't have any Kubernetes configuration yet. If we look for this kube home directory, we actually had one. Let's clean up here and remove kube and minikube. So we don't have any, I can remove Docker as well, so don't have any remnants of the old system here. So if we run this ls again, we should not have such a directory. And if we create a cluster here, VSL kind, it will go through, prepare the nodes, and in this case one node, and set up an environment for us. So now we have installed this cluster here. So let's switch over here. It asks us to check that we have this directory. Now we have a config file there. And if we go here and look at the cluster info for this cluster, so kube CTL cluster info, we will get an address here. We copy that over and go to our web browser here. We accept the unsecure port, and we have a cluster where we can talk to it. We are not allowed to talk to it, but we see that it's up and running. So that's a success. First one. And if we look at the current nodes that we have in our system, we have one kind control plane node running. And we can also look at all the namespaces in the system here. So there is a lot of things installed. We have some DNS things, we have the kindnet, we have a proxy, and so on. So there is a lot of different things installed here. So that was the first test. So let's remove that cluster again. Next up, we will create some configuration files here. In this case, it copies over a kind cluster with the API version of kind, and the nodes we want control plane and then worker, so 2 workers. And we will create that cluster from that YAML file. Let's see here, and there. And that will prepare a cluster with 2 nodes in our system. So this is a multi-node setup. And I have mentioned this in my earlier Kubernetes video, but in Kubernetes you have nodes where you run your workload. So you can have a few nodes, let's say 5 nodes, and that's different machines that run your system. In this case, it will be virtual machines, but you have a few nodes that you can run your workloads on, and then you have pods, which are your Docker environments that you run on different nodes. So Kubernetes will distribute a load between different nodes of your replica sets of pods that you want to run in your cluster. So now we have installed this multi-nodes system. We do a get nodes on that to see if we have 2 nodes here. We see we have the control plane and we have 2 workers. So that seemed to work. And next up, we will look at all the namespaces. See that we have a lot of things set up here. You see all the different settings for this cluster. Everything is set up and ready to run. And we want to have a nice dashboard. So there is a dashboard for Kubernetes. So we download and install that one. And we can get all the information for this dashboard, and we see here that it has a cluster IP, but it doesn't have an external IP, so we can't really log into it at the moment. There is a way to get into it, and that's by running a proxy, but I will not run the proxy at the moment because we need a key and to log into it. And to do that, we first need to create a service account. Let's see if we can copy that over. So that's an admin user as a service account. And then we need to connect that service account and give it some roles in the system, so we actually are an admin user. So first we create the account, and then we create some permissions to it. And after we have done that, we can check in the system for this admin user. So this is pretty much look at the Kubernetes dashboard, describe the secret in this, and grep the admin user. And this will give us a token here. So this is a very long token. And if we copy that token and then run the Kubernetes proxy. So we have proxy, let's see here. And it was here. It's kube control proxy, kubectl proxy. Oh, proxy. Now we have that running on port 8001. So 8001. We copy that over to our web browser here. So now we can see the dashboard, but we need to log in and enter a token. So you see here, enter a token. And that's the token that we created up here for our service account. So we copy that over, paste it in, and sign in. And now we are in our Kubernetes environment with all the nodes here. You see you have the worker node 2, and the control plane. And we see that it's running quite smoothly. It has memory, 50 megabytes. So that's not that much memory, but it's still up and running and doing some work. So that was a working cluster with kind. And when we have done that, it was pretty simple to get up and running in our Windows environment, but we want to do more. So let's remove this one. Let's see if we can find this delete cluster. And then it was VS kind multi-nodes. So let's remove that cluster. Next up, we will try to install Minikube. And when we did all this setup here, I had some issues with Minikube. There were quite a few issues, and I had to both look things up and do some manual changes. But first off, we have all these commands here: download the Minikube executable, make it executable, and put it in our USR local bin. So that's pretty much the same as we did with kind. And then it tells us to start the Minikube with the driver none. And that will not work. And they say in this guide that it will not work. And you need to install contract. So there's connection tracker, I guess. And I have done that. So that was one package that was missing. I installed that. That's the first caveat. And then when it didn't work either, it tells you that you don't have the correct systemd installed. Then you need to install the systemd session. So you need to have both the font configuration, dbus user session, and daemonize. I don't know why we need these packages, but I followed the guide here. And then we needed to set up a systemd namespace start script with a lot of things, and an enter systemd name script, and make this enter script runnable and add it into our bash rc, which is run when you are starting up your session. So this will set up a lot of things for systemd and make it running. So I just edited. This is the command that you edit with, and after that, here is the script. So they haven't separated the edit command from the actual script. So that's something that you need to keep in mind as well when you follow this. Here is the command to edit. This is the script. Okay? So when we have added that and then closed our session, so we don't have the Linux environment running anymore, we close that out and then start it again by taking the start menu, checking Ubuntu, and you will get into the system again as you have it here. And after that, you will have systemd running. So if we run the ps command and grep for systemd, yeah, so EF is what we'll need to run, and then we get here that the systemd is running up here. So that's what we want to see after we run that command. And when we do that, they say that you can run the minikube command to install with driver none. That, however, is not true. We can't do this. What we will do instead is copy this over, and let's see if we can actually do the copy. and then don't use the driver none, use the driver, let's see here, Docker. So we change the driver from none to Docker. If we do that, we can actually do this install. If we do none, we will get even more errors. And I looked around on the net and found a specific issue in the Docker, in the Minikube GitHub repository as an issue. And the solution here was just to change driver to Docker. But they didn't really talk about why it didn't work with none. I guess this specific guide is since April, I believe, and there might have been a lot of changes in April, so that might be the case, that it doesn't work because of that. It's still a work in progress, and installing Minikube in your Windows system subsystem for Windows, subsystem for Linux is still a work in progress. It's not really done yet. It's they are working to make this smoother and easier, and in the future we probably will just get an executable that we download that will set everything up for us. But this is the current state that we have here. So now I have installed that, and I should be able, first off they wanted us to say that, look at the current directories for Minikube and see that our user has access to those. So we run this chown on those directories, and then we can use kube control to see that we have something up and running here. We actually have a DNS here with a proxy address. Let's see if we can look at that. And yeah, so we have something up and running here. And we have a Kubernetes master port here as well that we can go to and just look at that and get this failure that we had earlier. So that's good that we have this up and running. The cluster is available, and they look at all the namespaces to see that everything is fine. And we can see here that we have the cluster IP running, and we don't have any external IP and so on. So this is our Kubernetes cluster, it's running. Next up, we want a nice dashboard again. And if we just run Minikube dashboard, it will enable the dashboard for us. The control plane is not running. Okay. Minikube start. When we looked up here, it should be up and running, right? Minikube dashboard. Enabling dashboard. Let's see, there we have it. And now we have this address here that we can go to. Let's switch over and go to that address. And we have a Minikube dashboard. So here we can look at it, and we see that we have pods, we have one Minikube node. So Minikube does not support multiple nodes. We only have one node running in our Minikube system, but it's mini, so that's perhaps okay. And if we go back to the guide again here, they want to look at the namespaces, and if we do that, we will see what we saw earlier with the cluster IP and so on, and that we don't have an external ID. But they want to try to fix this, and I have tried this by running this edit command here. So kube control edit service Kubernetes dashboard with the namespace of Kubernetes dashboard. So we will get this configuration script here, and at the bottom here you have cluster IP, and they said that if you change this up, let's see if I can get my keyboard to work. So if we remove that and add load balancer instead, and that edit is done, then do you see here, load balancer should be what should be added there. And we should remove the 2 last lines as well. Okay, let's do that. That was something that I missed. I didn't read carefully. So if we remove those 2 lines and change to a load balancer in the file, and then run the namespace dashboard again, so we get all the information here. You see that you have this Kubernetes dashboard with a load balancer that has an external IP pending, and then port 80 is mapped to 32520. So if we copy that over, we should be able to go to localhost colon and that port, and that, if it works, should load our environment with this dashboard. As you see here, this is what they did, and I haven't gotten that to work at the moment, but we still have the options to run the Minikube dashboard here. So that works just fine. So we can work with our dashboard and look at it, but this load balancer that they added at the end of this blog post don't work for me. So maybe you get it to work in your system, but I had no luck there. And the conclusion they have in this blog post down here is that the kind D installation is very easy. It has support for multi-nodes. You can manually install plugins, and it can be persisted, but it's not designed for that. It's just an environment to test out your system. And there is an alternative of K3D. And Minikube is a little bit harder to install, doesn't support multi-nodes, have plugins, can be persisted, and also have an alternative. So now we have completed this blog, gone through everything, tested everything out. I hope that you found this interesting, and I hope that you learned something today. If you have played around with Windows subsystem for Linux in your environment, please leave a comment down below and tell me what did you use this very interesting system for. If you like this video, give it a like, share it with your friends and colleagues. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and I really hope to see you in the next video.